So it's pretty early on a Saturday morning to be out in the garage, but I thought we got some nice weather coming this weekend, and I would get out early and do a little techno magical kind of video this morning on that thing, on how I verified my initial timing. So I got a little bit of laptop stuff to show you, but it won't be real in depth on that. It's just kind of got to change a couple settings quick so that we can verify our timing. And then I'll show you kind of my setup for how I do it on the bike. And it's something you can do yourself. But yeah, it's just something you need to know. Make sure that when you're making timing adjustments on the bike, that if say you're running 30 degrees of timing, you want to make sure you're actually running 30 degrees of timing and that you're not off on a crank index angle or something that you didn't verify. 0 is 0 and 30 is actually 40, and now you're blowing your motor up. So we're going to do a little breakdown, make sure everything's all kosher, and yeah, should be fun to finally do some little tech stuff. So for starters, what I need to do, because I had already put this back together after I did my deal here, I got to get the clutch cover off, because I got to get to the oil pump, because in order for me to be able to turn this bike over, I want to at least have some oil pressure. So we got to manually prime it while I turn the motor. Just not something you normally have to do, but because I don't have anything to run the oil pump otherwise currently, just one little extra step I got to do to kind of show you what's happening. I'm going to have to pull my scavenge pump off because we need to see this end of the crank. And then that plug there is for our timing mark. I got to pull the plugs out and the coil off because we need to get to one of the coils because we're going to check for a spark. And I will go ahead and do all that business, and I'll get us to the point where we're sort of ready to start making some adjustments and checking things out. So here's the setup. I got everything all ready to go. I got the plugs out. I got one coil on, number one. Got my inductive clamp for the spark. Luckily, my timing light, I can get power right here off my battery box. And having a timing light with adjustable timing is or adjustable advance is pretty handy. So you get yourself one of them. I got this apart so I can prime the motor. We'll run a little oil pressure through it. Then I just kind of spin the motor over shortly. I don't keep cranking on this thing because you don't need to verify it. You'll see it right away. But first thing I need to do is because, and this was a question I had to ask. That's why I said before, I'm not an expert on this. You don't have to do this all the time. So some things slipped my mind, but I had to ask a question of whether or not my ECU timing settings were actually affecting my reading down here based on my cranking RPM. And I was right, it does, because, and this is where I was kind of an idiot, it slipped my mind that there's actually timing adjustments in the ECU for cranking to get the thing to start. Because when I first went to check this, my timing mark was off. And I'm like, well, it's off by, the same amount as what I had set in my ECU for my startup timing. So what, you can do this two ways, but the easiest or probably the best way to do it would be if you have an aftermarket ECU, it doesn't matter what it is, zero out your timing. Not your timing table like when the bike is running. There should be some sort of table in there for startup cranking, timing. Just zero that so it's not adding any timing while the motor is only cranking over. You don't need to zero out your entire timing table. It's not into that part. The bike's not running. But what I'm going to do is go over here. And first thing you got to have set, and this is where it helps to know somebody that knows something, but you need to know a crank index position. This is aftermarket ECU issues here. On the Busa, 105 degrees. I had to ask what it was to get me in the ballpark. Turns out that number was correct. Excuse me. Basically what that number is in crank rotation degrees, basically where the crank trigger is in relation to top dead center. It's just letting the ECU know when it sees its trigger tooth come through 105 degrees before top dead center. That's when it starts all of its timing stuff. Hope I'm kind of explaining that right. Makes sense in my head, but basically just ask somebody what's your crank index position for whatever motor you're running. But that's what the ECU needs to see. And also what the trigger count is, tooth count, 24 minus 1, yada yada. This is more bike specific. What the hell's with the pop-ups here? You gotta be kidding me. I'm not even online. Jesus Christ. Anywho, what I want to do is go down to, or up to, I guess, my ignition timing. Ignition tables. Startup. Engine start. And all I'm going to do is put these at 0. I'm not going to save any of this because I don't want to save these settings. But I can make changes and send it without saving, and then I can reload the map without changes and send it right back to the bike, and I got everything I previously had for settings still in there. So there, that's zeroed out. So now my startup timing is 0. No advance, no retard. We'll send that to the ECU quick. All right, that's going. New map is in. Now, my cranking timing is going to be 0. Now, on a Busa N1000, slightly different arrangement, but they all have it. This little plug, I pulled that out so I could get the motor rotated over to, I wanted to color the timing mark, so I had to manually kind of spin the motor. But you really need to just get this plug out here. Your timing mark is in there. You see there's a mark on the threads. There's like a groove. That's your timing mark on the cases. And then I'll have to get a flashlight. This is going to be real hard for you guys to see because there's just no good way to get light into this little hole. Let's see if I can get this bumped over again. Bear with me, I got a flashlight in my mouth. Right there. Okay. If you can see in there. Well, this is going to be tough for you guys, I'm sorry. You can kind of see it there. That timing mark is just slightly left of the groove that's in the cases. That's top dead center, 0 degrees timing. So now when I crank the motor over with my timing light, as long as I'm set at 0 on here, every time it fires, that mark should be lined up if my crank index position over there is correct. And this is where if you didn't have help, you didn't know what that number was, you could slowly work into it, turn the motor over until you're in the ballpark, until that lines up. 0 is 0 and you're all good. But it helps to have somebody smarter than you that can give you a number ahead of time to get you in the ballpark. But now what we can do is I'm going to manually prime the motor a little bit. And also the timing light, this inductive clamp, you can go right to your coil harness. And then I got a plug in here. There's an arrow on there that lets you know which way it needs to go. See that arrow? Goes to the plug that way. So what I'm going to do now, we'll get some oil pressure, and then I'm going to try to get the motor bumped over and show you that you can, check your timing to make sure you're confirmed 0 is 0 top dead center. So we're just spinning the oil pump gear with my little fancy tool. This shaft does get oil pressure, so I just keep my thumb over it so I'm not getting hosed. And also there's the clutch pusher rod is in there, and that'll kind of want to come floating out at the oil pressure. But all I'm going to do is watch my gauge up on the dash. That's 50 pounds. We'll just let it kind of run for a second. And see, I just kind of push that back out. Not a big deal. This is just problems you have when you don't have a clutch in the bike. Like I said, I'm going to start naming every video. I still don't have a clutch. Okay, we got oil pressure. Now I can actually crank the motor and we can verify timing. I'll try to get you in close so you can actually see the light. Okay, I got you zoomed in real close here. You can see right now the timing mark is lined up at 0. Got the timing light right here. That's how close in you are right now. But I'm going to try to do this from a little bit of a distance so I'm not right in front of the camera. I'm about, 10 inches back from the cover here. Try to get in a good angle. Leave the flashlight off so that the timing light shines. And then, yeah, so we just got to crank the motor over. that up there. Got stuff moving around. This isn't really ideal setup. Filming's hard. Okay, it's gonna spin over fast, so we'll see how much you can actually see here. Like I said, it's hard to see, but that timing mark is spot on. I wonder if I can find a way to color that a little better so you can see it. I'm gonna reprime the motor too. Okay, what I'm trying here is I took the whole little area where the timing mark is and blacked it out, and then went back and added the white mark. So hopefully that'll show up on camera better. I promise you it's on, but I'm trying to make it so you can see that. All right, I got you in here real tight now. So I'm gonna try to get the timing light just out of camera's reach so that the flash still gets in there. We got everything set. Now hopefully this shows up. Did you see it? You better, because I'm not doing it again. That's it. So that's really kind of the down and dirt, just kind of, quick way to double check that. As long as we know we got our crank index position is correct, we have our cranking timing, any settings are set to 0. We know that when that mark lines up, 0 is 0. No added spark, no retarded spark. Now we know any timing adjustments we make from here on out will be based off of 0 top dead center, so our timing will be accurate. Now, to backtrack a little bit, grab a beverage. So now, remember I said that I had to zero out my starting timing. There was 8 degrees in there. My startup timing, I zeroed it out so that my mark will be at 0. With 8 degrees in there, that timing mark is not lined up. This is where it's kind of handy if you got an adjustable timing light. All I have to do actually is put that at 8 degrees, and that'll line my timing mark back up to 0. So there is another way to do it, but I figured I'd show you how to make it 0 and 0. But once you have an adjustable timing light, you can figure stuff out. And this is where if you had a stock ECU bike where you weren't necessarily changing that crank index position, or you wanted to see what your timing was at, and you can check this while it's running too. Like you can have, that would be on. You can have these off and you can have the bike running. You would just have to make sure you can get to that lead on that spark plug. I have all of this stuff out, or all the plugs are out, so the motor turns over easier. I don't want to compression load on this without the oil pump running. That's why I've been priming the motor every time I turn it over for a second or two. Reprime it, turn it over, reprime it. It's a hassle, but I wanted to show you guys how I've been doing this. So yeah, if you got a stock ECU bike and you got it running, you can use that to figure out what your timing is at and verify if you're making adjustments, like the Boost by Smith harness, or you're doing ECU editor or something, whatever. There's ways to verify it with a timing light. So I hope this all kind of made sense. So that's kind of the down and dirty verifying timing process. I don't want it to get overcomplicated, but basically if you got yourself a timing light, you know where the timing marks are, clip the sucker on there and you can double check this stuff. Having an aftermarket ECU kind of throws a little bit of different wrench into works as far as adjustments and things. You can like looking for things to be zeroed out and whatever. But if you know what you got going on in your ECU, you got an adjustable timing light, everything should kind of correspond. If you got 12 degrees of timing into the ECU under your cranking, your startup stuff, whatever it might be, it should make sense that if you got 12 degrees in the timing light, your mark comes back to 0. You just kind of got to make sense of things, but it's just a verification process to know when you're making changes, that's what they're actually going to be. And excuse me. So I did this a handful of times on the 1000 because I ran different year crankshafts in that bike, but I always ran the 0304 crank pickup, the trigger wheel. And that has a missing tooth in it that goes to a master spline on the crankshaft of those years. Excuse me, sorry. Off the top of my head, I'm forgetting what years have that, what year crankshafts have that master spline. It's like a filled in spline, and then the trigger wheel itself has a missing spline so that it always goes on in the same spot. Well, you can run that same trigger wheel on the other year crankshafts that don't have that missing spline. you can physically look at the cranks if you have two side by side and figure out roughly what tooth it's going to be. But once you put that all together and put it in a bike, you can verify that you got that trigger wheel on correctly, because 0 will be 0 again. And I used to mark the crankshafts when I had them. I had like, that's so many parts, 1,000. But I used to mark them so I knew which spline it was. So if I was like rebuilding, freshening up, I was swapping stuff around, I knew looking at the crank, I'd be a little dot, be like, okay, that's the tooth that's supposed to be like filled in technically. So it'd be, like 2 teeth wide. So when I put the trigger wheel back on, I knew I was pretty much in the ballpark to start with, but I would still always verify that 0 was 0 and I didn't make a mistake. But yeah, I mean, timing's critical on making these things live, so it's good to know that you can, verify that it's correct. So I know that probably went fast and I was kind of all over the place, and I tried not to give you too much info. My brain kind of gets sidetracked pretty easy, and I wanted to kind of keep it on track. But yeah, that's it. So if you want to go play around in the garage, put a timing light on your bike. See you in the next video.